Good. Okay, we'll put it down in Christopher Powell. Good morning and welcome to everybody to. Oh, Bethany is smiling at me. It must have been not too bad.
Very good.
my Welsh language guru. So good morning and welcome everybody to this Trust Board meeting. Reminder that it's recorded. Reminder that the microphones are very sensitive. Number of welcomes this morning. A particular welcome to Navin, and a particular thank you, Navin, for the work you've done over the last few weeks when Chris has been otherwise indisposed. I think, Chris, you wanted to say...
Yeah, just to add to that, Chair, thank you for that. Just to sort of clarify Navin's attendance today, and I'm really grateful for Navin being able to attend, and thanks to him and the team. Navin will lead most of the finance discussion today because of my unfortunate enforced absence over the last couple of months, but I'm here as well, obviously, so you get two for the price of one.
And really good to see you back.
Thank you, great.
We've got two of our board members who are joining virtually. That's Hannah and Kerry, and you're on the screen. I see a nice little wave there from Hannah. Kerry, can you hear us okay?
Fine. Yes.
Good. All right. Thank you very much. You're a very long way away, you two, from my poor old 60-plus-year-old eyes. So I may or may not see your hand go up. So perhaps those people who are nearer the screen, if you see a hand go up behind me or over there, just give me the nod. It's not because I'm ignoring you, it's because I've got bad eyesight. So that's good. We've also got a few other people joining us. Erin Pollard from Audit Wales will be joining us later. Alex is down the end taking minutes, and Steve is on the Zoom call doing notes. I think that's all I need to say by way of welcome, other than just to make my now rather usual statement for the benefit of anybody joining us externally, that this board meeting is not the sum total of governance. It's actually the end of the governance cycle, that the governance process really starts with the committees where this board delegates the deep dive. It's where it delegates the forensic detail and the analysis for assurance and for scrutiny purposes. Our role here is not to rehash those meetings or to repeat them, but it is to satisfy ourselves that that process has happened properly, which we do through discussion here, we do it through the AAA reports, we do it through the minutes and through the verbal reports from the chairs, which we will hear at various points during the meeting. So I hope that's all clear and understood. So the next thing we have is declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations of interest relevant to this board meeting agenda? No, good. Next item is the minutes of the previous meeting. Just to check if everybody's content with those, we need to approve them. No comments, corrections, alterations. Good. So we can formally approve the minutes of the last meeting. The next item is about the matters arising. There were, I think, just two, if I remember correctly. I think, Chris, yours was one about premises.
Yes, yeah, quick verbal update on this one. One thing I did manage to sort of progress in the last couple of months since the last meeting. What we've suggested, and hopefully the board will be comfortable with this, because I know last time I think we mooted the potential of using board development session for some of this. It was your I think, wasn't it? But obviously we've got quite a tight agenda for that. So what we're planning at the minute is, as board will know, we're going to be we will be officially opening the Merthyr workshop at some point in the next few months. Will be completed in the next few weeks. So what we were planning to do was probably tie something into that, do a bit of a show and tell, some storyboards, and use some of the meeting space as part of that official opening day to widen it a little bit, to do to hopefully respond to the request and provide that kind of update the board, which hopefully will find interesting and helpful in terms of the some of the significant estates developments that we've delivered over the last 4 or 5 years. Probably we won't go back any further than that, but that's been an awful lot when you actually put it all together, which hopefully will be helpful. Not to say that we have still got a lot to do elsewhere on some of our estate, but hopefully that'll satisfy your request as well, and what we agreed last time with the board.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I think it's just important that we recognise the amount of work that we've done over the last few years, because when we see them individually, the schemes, it doesn't show the impact across the whole service, and we have done a lot. So that, I think that's a good idea, and hopefully we can put that into the public domain at some point, just to demonstrate the development of the service over the last few years. So thanks for that, Chris. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you very much. And the other item on there was about adding, I think, cultural values to the management information sheet, which I believe have been done, and we'll be looking at that later on in the agenda. So that's that one. The next item is just the chair's report. The only thing I just need to report is that, we did have the board development session between the last board meeting and this one, where our focus was really looking at the strategy development. It was looking at the management information suite, and it was also looking at Angie's people and culture plan. So unless anybody's got any questions on that, we'll move on. Okay, good. So the next item is to the Chief Executive. So over to you, Jason.
Thanks very much, Colin. So the paper's there as normal, and I'll take that as read. There's 4 or 5 items I'll just draw out, and then happy to take any questions at the end. Chris has just mentioned the South East workshop, so paragraph 11 on page 4, which is nearing conclusion. Chris, are people in there?
I'm going tomorrow, actually. I'm going to go and have a look tomorrow. I'm not quite sure whether we did manage to get people in there this week or not, or whether it's in the next week or 2, but I am actually going up tomorrow to have a look. So
Stuff. All right. So
it's on the cusp of
so that obviously brings to an end, if you like, our occupation of Blackweir.
it will indeed.
With colleagues moving, finally brings to an end, with colleagues from the workshops moving across to the new facilities, which is great stuff. Page 5, paragraph 21, looks at the fleet delivery for the last year or so. And I suppose I just want to draw this paragraph out and make particular mention and say thank you to the team, Chris, behind the scenes, because obviously there's been quite a bit of toing and froing and adjustment to the plan this year, which they've had to make. And of course there will be, as we know, in this current or last year and in this current financial year as well. And we're starting to change the fleet mix, as you can see from paragraph 21 here. So there's a bit more work behind that in terms of specifications, planning and readiness for the team, which of course adds burden there. So I think worthy of mention, and a special thanks for the fleet team that are doing that. Page 8, paragraph 32 draws out some work we've been doing with trade union colleagues on the ability to create a new role in the organisation. So this is an EMT3 role on a permanent basis. This is where we would make available a promotion opportunity for technicians, EMT2s, to progress through to EMT3 at band 5. Those roles would have additional training, skills, and therefore opportunities to manage patients differently in the community. We've been working with trade union colleagues for a couple of months on bringing this together, and we're on the cusp, I think, of being able to put that to the workforce. There's just a few details yet to be ironed out, but we're hopeful we'll be able to get that concluded in the next couple of weeks. And of course, this adds, Chair, to other roles which we've created, development opportunities and progression pathways for our people over the last couple of years, particularly or most notably when we introduced the current duty operations manager role and the senior paramedic role, having restructured what was the historical team leader at band 6. So this is another opportunity for our people to progress, and it's particularly important for technicians because most of the progression opportunities require people to be paramedics. So this is a good opportunity for those who choose not to progress for whatever reason to paramedic. Page 13, paragraph 55 talks about the introduction of clinical leadership within 111. So this, of course, is something, again, that we've been looking at continually improving for some time now. With the full national rollout of 111 complete, it's important that we continue to develop the service offer and also support our people in that service. And here you can see work that's coming to a conclusion to introduce clinical supervision into the 111 service. And then the final paragraph I just want to pull out in the report is on page 16, paragraph 75. And this talks about the work on culture, and particularly here in paragraph 75, the WAST Voices Network, supporting the Sexual Safety Charter and the other work which we've been doing around misogyny, sexual safety, and so on. There'll be more of that in the next couple of weeks, but I'm particularly pleased to see colleagues volunteering from across the organisation to be part of this network to support others, their peers in the workplace. And then just before I finish, it's not in the report, but all will be familiar with our WISH ambulance. So this is colleagues who volunteer their time from across the organisation to support journeys for patients at the end of their life, to take them to the seaside, to a football match, to a concert, to a wedding, prior to their death. The WISH ambulance is approaching its 50th journey. So almost a little anniversary coming up, if you like. But I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank all of those colleagues across the organisation who give up their time to enable those journeys to take place, and offer those special moments to those patients approaching the end of their life, but also, of course, their families who will treasure those moments for many years to come. So I think it's just a point to say thank you to all of our people who volunteer their time to enable that service to be provided. And I'll stop there, Chairman, and happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you. So questions to Chief Exec? Looking at the screen now. Yes.
Jason, can I take you back to paragraph 28? And this is regarding the additional duties of WAST staff in health boards. It's quite disappointing that not all the health boards responded, and that there's a further comment about reports to others without responding to us. So can I just understand that a bit more?
Lee's probably best placed to talk to this because you're much closer to it, Lee. And then perhaps I'll just pick up any residual points afterwards.
Thank you. Yes, so there have been some escalations or raisings of a raise of concern. We are aware of such raise to HIW directly, and also to our commissioner directly. It's been a varied experience across the system in response to the notice first provided and then the follow through. We have had local engagement, so our local management teams have been engaging with local ED teams and ED leaders. We certainly did that on the lead up to the cessation and since the cessation. We have also had I've been engaged in a mixture of dialogue with some of my peers. So some contact has been forthcoming and a little more proactive, and others I have not heard from directly at all. That, of course, doesn't mean that we haven't utilised the peer group in order to have discussion. So I've certainly engaged with the peer group, again, ahead of correspondence and ahead of any dates of cessation. And there has also been engagement since. Now, I say that was not directly me. I was covered whilst on annual leave. One of my assistant directors attended that group, into which we submitted a briefing that set out the rationale really for the WAST position, and engagement occurred. I think what's fair to reflect is that it very much feels like we've moved on from the sort of knee-jerk, potentially emotional response and got into a more logical thinking space. It's been somewhat, for me, assuring to have actually had some acknowledgement from across the system that this is not a role for the ambulance service and for pre-hospital clinicians to be engaging in inside ED activity. So that's been a step, because it was certainly not some of the initial reaction. So we have since had some acknowledgement and acceptance. What we are doing, where there has been a more proactive engagement on the issue, we are working with health boards around how we can aid a transition. So some health boards have talked to us about how could we temporarily continue to engage in some of that activity to aid them whilst they are enhancing some of their pathways. I think it's been somewhat exposing of the effectiveness of some pathways, and this has brought that to the fore, and some health boards are keen to seek out continual temporary assistance whilst they work through that.
Okay, I think that's helpful. I mean, I understand the pressure health boards are under, and as you say, if it helps them to demonstrate that the pathway is not working or they need more resource in a particular area, then probably the actions that we've taken has been helpful as well. And the rationale within the paper, I think, demonstrates why it's not right for our staff, without being confrontational with the health board colleagues. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, Martin.
Just to add to that, we had a conversation at the Finance Committee, at Performance Committee about this very issue. And whilst we didn't conclude, we had the same sort of conversation, really, that concluded that this is where we are. I mean, 4.5 million is the financial consequence, if you like, of or waste, potential waste of 4.5 million pounds worth of resource. But it's not just that. I think it's the clinical component of it, which Paul is pushing up here. I think we should go back on it, really. I think there is an opportunity here for us to work smarter, maybe the right word, with our A&E colleagues and see if we can do something around this. Because on the one hand, you've got patients waiting to be picked up. On the other hand, you've got patients in the backs of ambulances, and you've got clinical staff where they're sitting on their hands. You know, something's not going to feel right, does it? So it is probably worth pushing back on this one and seeing where it goes.
Well, I mean, on the, I wouldn't necessarily describe it as pushing back, but we've certainly had. I mean, I can think of one particular health board where we've had direct, a couple of their directors and their chief exec and myself and a couple of our directors joined them specifically, Martin, on those particular points to say, what more is there that can be done to loosen the bottleneck, which is the emergency department, and enable us to, either defray activity in the community or convey it somewhere else, so we don't create the problem in the first place at the emergency department. And that dialogue continues with that particular health board to look at the high volume case mix. High volume case mixes, which we've got the potential to defray and manage in a different way. So it's shone a light on opportunities which exist to do things differently.
Just something else we brought up at F&P last Monday, Finance and Performance Committee last Monday. On paragraph 31, the first bullet point, I was a bit confused by the term "not licensed for systematic care delivery." I've not seen that licensed term before. I just wondered if that is a mandatory licensing thing, then there's a case then, isn't there, to say we're not licensed except in, it says in exceptional circumstances. I just don't know. I've not seen that term before.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily. I wouldn't necessarily get hung up on the. It's a good point. It's a good point. I'm not sure.
It seems to be legalistic as well.
Is the right terminology here. We shouldn't be doing it. There would be. We're not commissioned, funded, resourced to do it. Our people aren't trained to do it. Obviously, therefore, risk emerges as a result of that, and there is likely to be, I would have thought, some Welsh risk pool cover issues in terms of litigation should an incident occur. Wouldn't necessarily, perhaps licensing is not the right word, but there are a number of issues which emerge from it.
No, I get all the issues. It's just that particular phrase seemed to me to have a legalistic kind of backing to it, which didn't seem right.
Okay,
thanks.
Thank you, Chair. I don't have any questions, just 2 comments, please, if I may. As always, the report demonstrates the breadth and depth of work ongoing across WAST, and there are so many positives in this. And Jason, you've drawn attention to some. There's just 2 specific paragraphs I'd like to draw attention to myself, please. The one is the paragraph 47 in relation to the Welsh language. And I just wanted it on record how pleased I am that we've now recruited our own translator, because I think that's really important. It's something we've discussed for a little while, and I think it will absolutely help us take forward our intentions, really, in terms of the Welsh language provision moving forward. And also that we've started work on the Welsh language workforce strategy, which would be the cornerstone, really, of how we progress this in the future. The second comment was in relation to paragraph 53 in the Civica experience platform. Again, really pleased to see that we now hope to increase the volume of patient experience information as a result of that. And I just wanted to check, really, that we'll have sight of some of the feedback coming from that inquest meetings moving forward, Liam.
very much so.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Kerry, I believe you had your hand up.
No.
No, good, okay. Any other questions? I was just going to ask about the really interesting development of analgesia for our volunteers. And I just wondered whether at some point, not for now, but it'd be probably interesting for this board to get a bit of a report back on how that's actually working in the field, how many people are using it, and the kind of response that it's being received with.
We'll happily bring that back in due course.
That would be great. I think it'd be really interesting to get some sort of feedback on that.
Yeah, sure.
And the other thing, I wasn't sure whether I read it in your paper or whether I read it somewhere else, but I think I read somewhere a comment that the vacancies that we've been having in the clinical support desks, in the ones particularly, have now been pretty much filled. Have I read that, or did I imagine that?
So CSD and 111 just being slightly separate. We have been working on the backfill for CSD. So we've got 2 cohorts scheduled for training coming up. We didn't manage to fully fill the vacancy in the round of recruitment that's just occurred, but there, as I say, we've got a further round of recruitment to happen ahead of winter. So hopefully we're still confident that we can attain the establishment as we head into winter. 111 for clinicians is a slightly different position, and of course we've had some. We will have some constraints given the potential deployment of change in the service.
Any other final comments to Chief Exec before we move on? Looking at screen, it's all okay. Good. All right. Thank you very much. Next item, Estelle, any questions from the public?
Chair, no, we haven't received any this morning, but what we will do is if we receive any during the course of the meeting, assuming we've got contact details for the person who's posed them, we'll go back separately outside the meeting and respond.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Okay, in that case, we can move on to Star Story. Liam, do you want to introduce this? Would that be the best way?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So we have a story today that is an experience shared by Teresa, one of our emergency medical technicians. I will say up front, it's quite a distressing story to listen to, but I thought it was an important one to bring because actually it builds on the presentation to the last public board in which we talked about the work we're doing to support people with dementia accessing our services and thinking about how both within our next service and specifically here within our emergency medical service, we support our crews to offer the best care possible to people who are quite often very distressed. So the story comes, it's a joint story really, it's very much a staff and a patient story that very clearly articulates the impact for our staff when they're dealing with difficult situations, but also the distress of a patient who was in a very difficult situation. I think it's really important to share that. I have shared the story also with the Exec Director of Nursing for Swansea Bay Health Board. It's important I say up front that as part of the initial care, there was a safeguarding referral completed, and this case is going through the appropriate channels. And the exec for Swansea has personally agreed that he's going to review the story and see if there's anything further they can learn from it as a result. The 2 things I would like us to focus on from a board perspective when we view the story is, firstly, our staff experience. I think it's really important that we kind of recognise what the individual has gone through. She had written this story. I read the story and I have to say I was quite emotional reading it. Then we invited her to come and present it, but actually that was just a step too far, hence the video. And when you watch the video, I personally, again, was quite emotionally struck. So really thinking about what it means for our staff in these situations. And secondly, then the role of Rita. So you will have heard the dementia care team have heard me talk about it a million times. It's a piece of tech that actually this demonstrates the absolute value of it. So I think we're going to push play now. Thank you, Alex.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Stevens. I'm an EMT2 and I'm based in Carmarthenshire locality in Ammerford Station. I have the pleasure of being a Rita champion using the Reminiscence tablet while on the road. I have written a reflection with regards to supporting a dementia patient and which I would like to read for you. Myself and my colleague received a job on the screen in Swansea as a doctor referral in Singleton Hospital for social needs. There was no other information for us before we arrived at scene except the patient's name and age, an 83-year-old male. As we pulled into the road, I saw the property to my left and the front door was slightly open. My colleague went to the end of the road to turn the ambulance around. We were facing the back of the property. My colleague asked what the wide black stripe was going down the window, and I replied, mould. He said, is that the house we're going to? And I replied, yes. As we approached the front door, the smell was awful, and my colleague's not good with smells. And he said to me, if you weren't attending, you would be now. I said to him that he has to come in with me, so I put a drop of perfume under our noses, which I keep a small sample bottle in my pocket for such occasions. I opened the door and called out to the patient. He asked who it was, and I replied, ambulance. I could see him laying on a broken bed, which was slanted to the wall, and he was tight in the space. He had a catheter in place, which was full of dark urine. He was half naked and covered in excrement, as was the bed and the floor, all the way from the toilet through the hallway to his bedroom. Sadly, it was obvious that this was not just a day's worth, but weeks of excrement everywhere. My colleague went outside to get some air, and I spoke to the patient directly. He asked me to leave and to get out of his home. He didn't want or need anyone. He said for me to get his wife. Then he must have remembered where she was. And with such a sad voice, he said, no, she is dead, isn't she? And he cried. I said how sorry I was. And then he again said, get my wife. She will tell you to leave. He then asked why I was in his home. I said that we were here to take him to hospital to help him. He shouted at me then to get out, and he was not going to hospital, and again to get his wife. He then remembered again that she had died, and he was full of grief yet again. It was awful to witness him going through grief so often. He kept telling me to leave, and I said, if you could get up and walk for me, then I may well leave. He couldn't move and started getting angry. I then said to him that the doctor had asked us to come to see him. He instantly changed and said, if the doctor wants me to go with you, then I will. Just like that, he changed. Sorry, next page. I went and got my colleague and a carry chair, etc. I wanted to get him on the ambulance as quickly as possible before he changed his mind. I cleaned him up as best I could, once on board, and settled him on the stretcher. We collected his medications and locked his home behind us. The house was unfit for anyone to live in. While collecting his meds, I found only off food with mould on, with flies in the rooms and also nesting in the wallpaper, excrement everywhere and signs of mice and rats. I obviously put in a safeguarding for him, but was more concerned that some medical person had attended to him at some point with reference to his catheter and medications that were delivered. Yet his home had been in this state for some obvious time. Also, neighbours in his road. I couldn't live next door to someone in need and ignore them. Excuse me. It is not for us to know the outcome, except that we were able to take him to a place of safety and for him to receive the correct treatment. Once we had taken his observations, etc., on the ambulance, we made our way to hospital, and he was very unsure of where he was and asked me again for his wife. I asked him what her name was, and he replied with a smile on his face, obviously thinking of her. I asked where he had met her, and he told me at a dance hall in Swansea. This bit always gets me, and they fell in love. He started telling me, excuse me, he started telling me that they were ballroom dancers and they won many times. I asked him if he would like to see some ballroom pictures and if he could show me what his wife's dress was like. He was so happy showing me what kind of dresses she wore and the colours and his favourite. I found some videos of the tango and foxtrot. He seemed so aware all of a sudden and so talkative. He described his wife and how happy they had been together and the full life they had led. Not once after focusing on the ballroom information and his wife did he forget that she wasn't alive. He just wanted to talk about her and all they had done together. Once we arrived at Singleton Hospital, we took him into the ward as the doctor had pre-alerted him. and I helped him to get into a gown and to the bed. I told him that myself and the nurse needed to take the rest of his clothing off and to remove his socks so he could be properly bathed and changed. He asked if I could put the socks in a bag for him, as they were his only pair. I did, into a clinical waste bag, as I couldn't get his socks off, and I realised that his skin had grown with them, as they had been on him for so long. So I had to cut them off, and I had to pull them gently to release them from his skin. Sorry, I'm reflecting now. The poor man had just been left to his own devices and without any capacity to do that, as he had dementia, albeit not severe, but he had been diagnosed. So very sad, but he was also happy to be in hospital and safe. Before we left, we managed to get him something to eat and a cup of tea. He held my hand and said, "Thank you for talking to me," excuse me, about his wife. He said, "No one speaks of her anymore." I told him to tell the nurses about their ballroom dancing, and perhaps once on his feet, he could show them how to do the tango. He laughed and said he would love to dance again. It was a very sad job, but a good outcome, and having the resources at hand to assist a patient with pictures and videos helps so much. Thank you.
Well, very moving story. And I think we understand exactly what you're saying here about the sort of issues beyond our own in terms of the care provided and the ambulance service. There's clearly all sorts of questions that one could ask and investigations that one would want to sort of pursue in relation to the background of that case. But we're here obviously to think about our staff, the role that they play. And that was very moving. And I think you told a very real story about the issues that we're facing today. I'm sure there are many of us, including me, who've had relatives who've suffered from dementia, and it just brings it home to you just how much people need support and care. Any comments, any reactions? Liam, did you want to?
Yeah, kind of just, I think it's just one bit of reassurance having people having now heard Teresa's story, just to reassure colleagues that from within her team, she's getting all the support you would expect her to get from within her line management. And also, she's actually been working really closely with Alison, who's our dementia care lead, who has also been supporting her. So I just want to reassure people that you can hear the impact that that job had for Teresa, and we've done everything we can to make sure that she's looked after.
Good, good. Kevin, you?
Yeah, sadly, not that unusual.
I agree.
And I just wonder whether, you know, given the sorts of conversations that are going on at the moment, whether this and other examples like it are, you know, a real reason for properly resourced, developed virtual wards. I mean properly resourced, not, you know, simply, you know, a jobbing, you know, sort of effort. Properly resourced, you know, properly led virtual wards, because it strikes me that this chap with support could probably have been okay in the community, and there are many people like that. I just wonder whether that's something that, I mean, are those conversations happening meaningfully, or is it, you know, this is a direction of travel, it would be nice to do, but
So within the 6 Goals programme, the virtual ward work is sitting under the community and primary care infrastructure. And I actually had a meeting this week with the lead for the workforce component, and we were talking about kind of what do we need to do in terms of workforce, what are the skills, what are the capabilities going to be needed to make a virtual ward work at scale. I think the honest interpretation I would have from a WAST perspective, and note I'm saying it from WAST as opposed to from a health board, is we can see some really good work going on across the country in different health boards, but is that kind of occurring at a consistent rate? Is it having the consistent kind of impact? I'm not sure that that's there yet, but I certainly, when I talk to Dorothy, I would say that there is definitely ambition to move into that place. It's doing it against all of the other workforce and healthcare challenges that they're dealing with at the moment. In Swansea, I was talking to Gareth yesterday, and you know, it's July, and they've got 90 beds open in the hospital that should not at this stage, we open the 200 patients that really should be in a position that they could be discharged, material for us in our experience, but also incredibly material in the context of how a virtual ward and community services can support.
Thanks, Liam. Couple hands up. I think it's Bethan and Jogger, and then to Martin and also Andy queuing up. But should we go to Bethan first and then to Jogger?
Thank you, Chair. I found that really difficult to watch. I think that was partly because of what I do in my day job, and I'm sure Kevin is right in saying it's probably not the only example of that situation. But the impact that had on Teresa is very, very clear to us, and I've no doubt we are giving her the support and her colleague the support that's needed. But it just made me reflect as I was listening to that story. You know, it's very easy to take for granted the job that our staff do every day when they go out there. They never really know what situation they're walking into, and there's a whole host of different types of situations. And they're each tragic, I'm sure, in their own way. But something like this really tugs at the heartstrings, and I think it stays with you for a little while afterwards. So very pleased to hear that we are giving that support, and that's probably likely to be needed for a little while. On a different slant, you know, the sort of thing that's in my head is there's never been more of an argument, I feel, to justify why health and social care need to work more collaboratively and work in partnership. Because it sounds to me as if dementia is not the only issue in play there. There are other clear issues, as far as I can see, for that individual, whereby, you know, we would have hoped that the care in the community, and I say that term generally, would have responded. And Teresa herself said, you know, the fact that other people clearly had been into that property and seen that situation developing, and it seems as if they hadn't taken action and raised a safeguarding. I guess my final point would be, I could talk about that for a long time, but I won't. You'd be glad to know, Chair. In terms of the outcome of the safeguarding, is that individual now receiving the support that they need? Are they still in hospital? Have they been discharged, or don't we know yet?
So I haven't got the detail on the patient within, and I wouldn't necessarily get close to the safeguarding of this patient because it would sit with the health board. But I've been assured by their EDON that they are taking the right steps to support the patient and their outcome. I think one of the things you described there, Bethan, which is true, we don't know, people don't know what they're walking through the door.
No, they don't.
But often they don't know what the outcome is either, and both things are can be as challenging as another. Often, if it's a trauma event, there'll be an informal network that gives you a feedback on the outcome achieved through clinical conversation. But actually, in this situation where you end up in an admitted pathway that's very kind of disparate, it doesn't have that knowledge coming back to you all the time, which is a challenge.
I take my hat off to our staff every time I hear these stories, and you know, I'd like to say on record, thank you. That seems so weak and is not enough. But what else can you do, really? But when you hear those stories, it really does hit home. And that's why we're all sat here today wanting to do our very best. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you, Bethan. I'm sure we all share those views. Jogger, do you want to go next?
It was going to be very similar to what Bethan said. I'm glad we're giving Teresa the support, and I echo the fact that the job our staff do, you know, it's on so many different levels. Such a difficult when they're going into the unknown. It's the physical dangers, the emotional distress, as was all told in that story, which you find, and it clearly had a visible effect on Teresa. So no, I echo that, and it was a brilliant outcome. But I was wondering whether that kind of story, and I imagine there's more examples, as everyone's saying, is that a story that we can share with colleagues in the social care externally, just to say, well, look, there clearly had been other people. Appreciate there's an investigation going on, but whether we can say, look, this is when things have kind of gone completely wrong and missed. This is a recent event. Is that something we can share? Maybe just to bring it back to people's minds.
So I think, as Bethan was saying, and indeed Kevin, regrettably, these situations are not isolated. They do occur. It is unusual that someone has brought it to the fore in a way that allows me to bring it here and share it with our board and with the public who are observing. We are thinking about how we're using all of our patient stories. So our patient stories are used, and our staff stories, in fact, are used quite extensively internally to support understanding as case studies and things that we learn from. But I'm conscious we could probably do more with them externally to kind of foster some of the conversations. So having shared this today, I actually referenced it in the conversation with Dorothy, some from the 6 Goals programme earlier in the week. And I will have this conversation as a follow-up, but to kind of give it it's a point of conversation. You can use it as a case study with different professionals, not just health professionals, but different professionals and community organisations to think about what else is there that could be done in these situations, and how do we get the right signposting in place early enough, and the right community resilience and infrastructure. We know the challenge is not all of this stuff is going to come with a full package of care and an answer to everything. So we do need to be thinking a little bit more broadly in supporting people in these circumstances. I hold on to in that story, and I will just say again, is the Rita tablet, the difference that it made. And it's, I think as we think about our investment as our own organisations, we work with our partners going forward, that technology is in pilot with us at the moment. We're doing the evaluation, but when you have stories like that, which we can hopefully quantify with an effective evaluation, that becomes material to making a difference to people in these circumstances.
Good. Thanks, Liam. So I think we've got Andy and we've got Kerry as well. Thank you, and also Martin. So, oh, crikey, okay, and Rachel. So Andy next, and then across to Martin, and then up to Kerry. Andy.
Incredibly important story, Liam. So, great one to bring through in respect to that. What was interesting for me in regard to that is it instantly took back to the 24th of January 1991 to the very first patient I ever attended on that day. And it was not a dissimilar circumstance to the one Teresa describes. And I can remember that like it was yesterday. And the burden of impact incidents like that happen because, we all think of those traumatic incidents, being things like children, being, physically traumatic things that you would see. But they aren't the ones that kind of burn into you and last their lifetime or whatever. And I'm sure Teresa will probably, in however many years to come, be able to remember that incident, and it's the long-lasting impact that these kind of incidents have. And I genuinely think the majority of the general public don't realise that people in our communities, their neighbours, exist in this kind of squalor. And I think the opportunities we have as an organisation to shine a light on these poor people in our communities and how they are, for want of a better word, just simply existing, I think is really important. So, credit bringing it forward, and credit to Teresa for having the bravery to kind of talk about it, because it is something that will stick with you a lifetime.
And to think about the fact that Dave, you mentioned now in the 1990s, so something like 30 years, 25 years later. Circumstances don't appear to have changed very much. So I'm slightly losing track, but I think Martin next, and then we'll go up to Kerry. So Martin.
Some of the things already been said, but I mean, my reflection was perhaps more about the role of WAST in these circumstances. And I guess there's two things that came out for me. One that's probably been covered reasonably well, and that's preparing our staff for these events and maybe supporting them when they actually go through it. So that's obviously an obvious role. I think the other one, though, is more legalistic, and perhaps Joker touched on it a little bit, is, so what are we supposed to do when we come across these cases? Should we be formally making some sort of report to the other organizations? Because I think, you made the point, there's an assumption that people know about these things, but that's what it is. It's an assumption, and my guess is that when we come across these, we might assume that the GPs know. I don't know. I mean, maybe there's a formal reporting framework we should be involved in. And I know the laws have changed, and Joe will probably know this, deprivation of liberties and all sorts of acts that have been brought about to prevent these things happening. And as dementia becomes more of an issue for us as a society, these situations are going to probably increase rather than decrease. So my reflection was really on the role of WAST as an organisation in terms of You know, what do we do when we come across these cases?
Do you want to
And just
mention,
learn
Liam?
from
I know
them.
you were nodding about processes and procedures there.
So in my introduction, Martin, I was very careful to confirm that we had completed appropriate safeguarding referrals. So the legislation that is in place in here is the legislation that deals with vulnerable adults. And there are multi-agency frameworks, agreements, information sharing protocols, requirements in place that are completed. So we, in our next Quest meeting, will be receiving the 22-23 safeguarding annual report. It will highlight an increase in the number of referrals that our crews have been making for vulnerable adults across the country. We are full participants in all of the safeguarding boards through our safeguarding team, and where appropriate, we bring clinical and operational colleagues in to those conversations. And the safeguarding route enables all parts of the health and care system to be brought together. So the general practice would be made aware of an alert being raised. That would then trigger with the health board wider health engagement where needed. The safeguarding process is owned within the local authority that has a direct relationship into social care, and as needed, the social worker would then bring other parts of the local authority services to bear. So importantly, before I brought it was to ensure we had done all of those things that you would expect us to do, and Teresa very clearly articulated that she had done that, but also ensuring that from a board perspective, you know, our liaison with our partners was taking place so that they also had sight to make sure that in this instance they can look in, but also it, as we indicated, it's a good case study for learning in terms of other circumstances that might be out there.
Good, thanks, Liam. So we'll go to Hannah in a moment, and then we've got comments to be made, I think, from Rachel and from Brendan and from Estelle, and perhaps we'll think about drawing to a close when we get to those comments. So over to you, Hannah.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not going to repeat what others have said, other than to say that it's a horrible story to hear, and that my thanks and huge compassion go out to Teresa. I just wanted to reflect, picking up on what Liam said about the work that we've been doing as an organisation around dementia, and just to reflect on how effective that seems to have been in an incredibly challenging situation. I imagine that responding to that degree of context and knowing what to do and keeping a clear head and all these things that Teresa did will have been underpinned by some very clear training. And so I'm interested, first of all, in how we make sure that others know how effective we're finding the it's sort of memory therapy, isn't it? And also whether we can look into similar initiatives, which in many ways are fairly simple, but clearly make a significant difference to those who experience them, possibly things for other patient groups that we see regularly. Thanks.
Liam, do you want to respond to that?
Yes, so Teresa noted she is actually a dementia champion, a RETA champion, and so she is very much sponsoring the work that we're doing in this space alongside Alison and others. Where we have the tablets deployed, then obviously the crews that are working with them get the enhanced kind of support and training in using them and knowing when they're appropriate. We happen to know that actually the tablets have been used in other circumstances as well. So where they've had patients, particularly in handover delays, where there's been a long period, the tablets have been used to support patients in those circumstances as well, who are not necessarily suffering from dementia. For all of our staff, we have a comprehensive programme that kind of looks at dementia. There is training that's gone on in the past through the mandatory training processes, and then on top of that we have a number of modules that are available in our online training platform that staff can access and do access. So there's good support to training and awareness across our workforce, but there is specific training where we have the tablets deployed, and the evaluation of those is critical to us seeking the support to be able to roll them out further.
Good. Is that okay, Hannah? Good, thank you. So I think then, so probably Rachel, then Brendan, then Estelle. So Rachel, to you.
It was just a quick point. So, I mean, notwithstanding the real sadness of that story in many ways, it was very moving. One of the things that struck me was that sense of us being, you know, in many, not just in ELS, but in NEPs, you know, organisations that go in and see people in their actual lived environment, and to me, whilst we've got processes in place for the vulnerable and the safeguarding, there's probably a whole load of people underneath that who don't quite meet that criteria, but we're seeing them, we're seeing deterioration, and that came through in our public health plan, which we, you know, making every contact count, trying to get as much as we can from every contact. And I was just reflecting yesterday, I've joined we've been invited to the West Glamorgan RPB very recently. So that's I was talking to the program director of that yesterday about the different, you know, kind of groups they've got going on underneath the board, of which one is dementia and another one is for older people, and that is and I was talking to them about this very thing without knowing this story, about how actually we could play quite a significant role in that community in feeding in our intelligence and supporting patients. And she was quite excited. Now, it's difficult for us with RPBs, and Estelle's been on them for a while, but it's the capacity to get into 7 RPBs in the detail that probably we need to. But it's a place where possibly we can do some more with our colleagues in social care as well, some of these areas. So a possible you know, area to really work on there.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Brendan.
Yes, thanks. I mean, it's a very distressing type of story. Unfortunately, I think this is far more common than most people realise. And unless you've worked in primary care on the front line of social services or as a front line in the ambulance service, you probably don't realise just how frequently this is happening. The one thing with this story is that it actually went very smoothly, because it was a situation where the GP had already arranged admission. Now, the majority of these cases end up when we have a crisis call, our ambulance goes there, and where do you start? Because nobody has been in communication. There's no admission route. There is no assessment route. It's an increasing problem for GPs. I'm sure the GP has probably already tried to get an urgent social care assessment, but you know, what is urgent or emergency to us in medicine, unfortunately, is on a different time scale to colleagues in social services, for very good reasons. And he probably recognised that the only thing that he could do was to get this patient into hospital. But that's probably not where he should be. I didn't hear anything to say that this patient had an acute medical problem. Unfortunately, this man is now probably going to be in a place where he's going to be potentially over-investigated. He's going to have to wait for further assessments. He almost certainly isn't going to be able to go back to his place of residence. He will end up being one of these patients that are medically fit, but with a very long length of stay on one of our acute hospital beds, because the whole story just represents a system failure. I know what Kevin is saying, you know, the promises of virtual wards care in the community. At the moment, all I can see is that those are hopelessly under-resourced to even take care of the most acute physically ill people, let alone going into the scope of dementia, loneliness, social service problems. In terms of, I don't wish to sound too pessimistic on this. I mean, there are things that we are working on. I think that the alerting role is particularly important when our non-emergency staff are attending. This is, you know, it's been highlighted that this is a problem, a failure in society for some time. Many years ago, there was a plan to get postmen to try to alert people if the elderly weren't, you know, looking to take care of themselves. That didn't seem to be properly resourced or extended. I think in this particular case, one of the things that we have said going forward with the clinical strategy is that we will try to ensure that patients end up in the right setting. Now, in this case, obviously, the GP had already arranged admission, presumably to an elderly care ward. But where we end up going to these cases in a crisis, the problems that we then face are, do the crews just say, right, okay, well, the situation is awful, let's go and join the queue at the end of ED and get them medically assessed so we can be sure that they're not going to come to physical harm? Or do we spend more time on that job trying to get the right services involved? How do we put pressure on those services to actually respond quickly when the ambulance is called out? Because the problem comes back to the lack of integrated service and the poor communication that we have going across the different sectors of the health service and social care.
Yeah, no, thanks, Brendan. I think we all share those thoughts as well. So almost final word. I know Jason wants to say a couple of things, but almost final word to Estelle, I think, then, if you may.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to say that at the last board we had Alison and Dr. Andy with us, didn't we, talking about dementia. And after that, I reached out to have a chat with Alison about where they were up to with the work. And one of the things that struck me, and we had this conversation, and it picks up the Rita tablet. And just for the avoidance of doubt for anybody who's watching, the Rita tablet is a digital tablet rather than a pill, just in case there's any confusion. Yeah, this as we start to grow our charitable efforts, and I know we're convening later as charity trustees, these may be the sort of investments that we would wish to make with charitable funds that are sometimes difficult for us to make from revenue funds because of the the public sector finance landscape that we're in. So we had a very open conversation about the challenges of that, but it's something for us as we move forward. It's not an immediate solution, but it's something to think about how we seek donation and how we align that donation with some of this excellent work that we may not be able to continue if we have to rely exclusively on government funds.
Thanks, Estelle. I'm sure, Kerry, you were listening eagerly there with your charitable hat on. I think you're right, because this, to me, this is an example of the kind of almost perfect storm, isn't it, of increasing age, loneliness, reducing financial ability to meet that, failures in the social services. It's all sort of coming together to create that kind of perfect storm of distress. But actually, there are potentially some areas through charity and through working more intelligently, perhaps, and outside, thinking other ways in which we can bring help. So thank you. Jason, you wanted to just, I think, conclude.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Just 3 basic points, really. Firstly, to say thank you to Teresa and her crewmate. We don't know who that is, but thank you to Teresa's crewmate on the day for their, clearly the excellent care that they provided to this individual. The second one builds on Rachel's point that we are in 2,000 homes every day across Wales, across CMS and PTS. And we are that is a genuinely privileged position, probably like no other bit of the NHS, certainly like no other bit of the NHS, and probably potentially the public sector. So our people and us as an organisation are in an immensely privileged position to be invited into people's homes, 2,000 or more homes across Wales every day, and of course that then enables us to see all sorts of issues and circumstances which we can, and clearly exemplified in this case, we can assist with and offer access to other bits of the public service. And then the final point, Colin, I just wanted to make is, whilst deeply distressing at its most basic level, this incident, this case, this patient, it is not about trauma and complexity and lots of kit. This is about basic compassion, kindness and care. And Teresa and her crewmate have shown that in spades, and our people do that every day across Wales in difficult circumstances. very, very well, and we should thank them for that.
Thank you, Jason. I'm sure you'll clearly echo those words. Trish, you normally send a letter of thanks to people who contribute to our patient story. I'm sure you'll do that. And I think, you know, it will be, I'm sure you probably anyway, but I think it'll be worth reflecting in that note to Teresa, that it sparked a considerable interest and a considerable debate here, perhaps more than many. And that it is a story which is going to, like a snowball, kind of roll on, I think. It's not a story which will just kind of end with this. It's already been rehearsed in a number of different places, and I'm sure the consequences of that story is going to echo down conversations in different places quite broadly across the sector. So a very real thanks. I think it's worthwhile really underlining the fact that we thank Teresa for bringing it to our attention, and it's not only come to our attention, it's come to the committee's attention and to other places as well. And you know, the system will benefit from that. Okay, so if we're all content with that, thank you, Liam, for bringing that to us. And we will move on, and we'll move on to the accounts, which is the next item. And this is actually an item we need to approve. We need to approve the annual report and accounts and the letter of representation. Chris, do you want to kind of kick us off with this? I know that Navin's going to also lead on this.
Very briefly, just mindful as well that Audit Wales were due to join us,
Okay.
but we're running a couple of minutes ahead, aren't we? So
We are.
they were due to join at 10:40. So yeah, okay. So
Yeah. Well, why don't we move on in that case and move to the next item, which is just looking down. Actually, it's back to you, I think, Jason, isn't it? So the actions to mitigate avoidable harm. So this, again, just for anybody watching, worth just introducing that our two highest risks, which have been in the red for a long time, which relate to extended handover delay and to delays in reaching patients. We look at this very closely month on month. We're very much in the hands of our partners in the health system who significantly influence our ability to reach patients on time. And so because it's a red risk, we look at this and the committee is looking at it in detail every month. We have, for the last couple of board meetings, had a paper from Jason which has highlighted the work that has been going on. Things have improved slightly, but we're by no means complacent about it. And it is the summer, so we would expect them to improve slightly. So this paper follows the trend that we continue to look at these red risks in great detail. So Jason, up to you.
Thank you, Colin. So again, I'll take the paper as read, just a few points I'll pull out, and then Rachel might want to talk to some of the detail in the supporting table. But as you've mentioned, Colin, we have had some good progress in recent months. If we look at paragraph 3, whilst still, you know, extreme and excessive at about 18,000 hours a month in June, emergency department handover lost hours have reduced from their peak in December when they accounted for 37% of the fleet for the month. We're now down to about a fifth, so about 20%, still way too much and too high for us to be able to maintain utilisation, fleet utilisation at the right level to be able to respond in a timely way in every case. But nonetheless, that reduction in losses at emergency departments, principally at Cardiff and now in CTM, we're seeing sustained improvements, but they are helping us to improve response performance, but not quite yet at the level where we need it to be. You can see a summary of the actions with 13 of them complete and 8 on track for completion as planned. A couple slightly off track in terms of timing, but as you say, many of these or some of these actions we are relying on partners across the system to enable delivery for us. But those where we are in absolute control of delivery, we've got good progress. I just want to draw out one of the changes that we spoke about on the last occasion we discussed this, which was some changes to the red logic and how we use our resource to respond to calls. Those changes have now been deployed. We are now seeing data coming through from that, and we are seeing a reduction in what we call the multiple attendance ratio. So this is indicating a more efficient and better use of resources that are available. We've still got a way to go, but it is starting to wash through, and we're starting to see evidence of that improvement, which is good to see. And the final point I just want to highlight, and then happy to take any questions on the paper, is that whilst there is a way to go still on immediate release requests for immediate release directions, I should say, for patients in the amber category, we have got generally good compliance across most health boards now, the majority of health boards, with release directions for red patients. And indeed, I've sent this morning the latest compliance report to Chief Exec colleagues. 5 of the 7 health boards for the last couple of weeks have had no red release directions rejected. So yeah, where we've come from, that is good progress. We now need to continue the momentum with patients in the amber category. But happy to take any questions on the paper and perhaps field them amongst the team as well.
Thanks, Jason. And I think underlining that red release is important, because actually that's a big journey, because 6 months ago there was a significant pushback on some of the calls for immediate release, wasn't it? I wonder if it's worth just hearing from the chairs of Quest and from Finance and Performance, because I think you would have looked at these things. So I don't know, Doug, whether you want to add anything in terms of what your committee has been looking at on these risks. Oh, I'm so sorry.
I chaired that.
You did. You did.
Sorry.
Go on, go on. Yeah.
There's only one thing that I would pick up from what Jason said, and that is welcome direction of travel, but no complacency, because it is nowhere near where it should be, and it still could be considered hazardous at significant times of the day and night.
Indeed. It's ironic, isn't it? I mean, I can't remember the exact numbers, but we were losing something like 30,000, 40,000 hours. The fact that we're now losing about half that, you kind of feel it's congratulatory, but actually it's a long way to go.
And sorry, and the term avoidable harm, we should hang on to that as well, because there is undoubtedly avoidable harm, but harm happening because it's not avoided.
Absolutely. No, exactly. Brendan, you know, come to in a second. Did you want to add anything just while we're thinking about the committee's feedback on these particular risks?
I had some comments to make, and we've not met as Quest recently, so Quest haven't specifically looked at this in recent weeks. We look at this in every meeting, and we're meeting now within the next week and a half. So is it okay if I go into my comments, please? So, Jason, you've touched on the points that jump out at me, really, but there were 45 serious cases of avoidable harm, including death. So I think it is absolutely essential that we recognise the improvements, but actually we're nowhere near where we need to get to, because people are suffering serious harm and or dying as a result of us being unable to respond and get to them quickly enough. It is great to see the sustained improvement in Cardiff, and also the newer improvements across Cwm Taf, and that's welcomed. I guess my question was, can we see any early shoots of any improvements in other health board areas as well? I accept the whole system is under immense pressure, so I want to say that at the outset. I don't think this is easy for anyone. However, do you think there's any signs in any of the other areas?
Lee might want to comment on that, because you're getting much closer to the kind of daily delivery of it.
Yes, thank you. Yes is the answer. We've got, if we take the overall number, you know, quite right. Can I just echo? There are shoots of improvement. You know, we're down from 23,000 hours in May to 18,000 in June. I've taken a look at July. If July continues for the rest of the month as it has been during the month, we'll land in a similar position to June for July. And so potential for plateau, which I think therefore quite right to hold on to the notion that we are not there yet. But we are seeing reductions across now most of the health boards. And what I'm also starting to see is a reduction in the extreme long delays as well. So we can see that the 4-hour delays are starting to come down, but those occasions of seeing 18, 20, 30 hours of handover delay are becoming much rarer in comparison to where we've been. And so that has to be really welcomed. But of course, yes, there is, we are not anywhere near where we would want that to be, but July shaping up like June, so around 18,000, I predict.
Sorry, Chair, can I come on my final question, please? So again, Jason referred to the immediate release directives, and the red are looking really, really good. It's such a vast improvement from where we were, and obviously that's having a real positive impact on some people. However, we do know, when we discuss this regularly, that in the amber category, that does lead to serious avoidable harm, or worse. And over 66% or more were declined in this period for the amber category. So I guess my question would be, you know, is there anything more that we can do in terms of discussing this with health boards so they're equally as supportive of the amber category, the amber requests, as they are of the red?
Shall I take that as well, Chair? I'm glad again we've picked up the red. The red position is significantly improved. We do have, I think, still some disparities amongst health boards. There is a standout health board, unfortunately, in Swansea Bay. They are also a standout health board in relation to the handover delays, full stop. So we're not seeing the same trends of improvement at Swansea Bay as we have been seeing elsewhere across the country, and that's certainly the case for the immediate release positions. In terms of our process, which was audited this year through our internal audit, so that gives us some assurance in relation to our application and of course the steps we're taking in response to the recommendations. I have recognising that this is all manual, and this is really important. So the application clearly is manual and the data recording is manual. There's no automation in this, so we're relying on humans, which means it's not 100%, but our people are conscious, and we therefore need some checks and balances. We have the weekly chief exec report that Jason has just alluded to. On the back of that, I am sharing still on a weekly basis with my counterparts the analysis that occurs beneath that, and our analysis includes a review of all declined reds, and importantly what we're looking for is our application and whether our application has been consistent with process. And as you've mentioned, that there's a volume of amber, we simply don't have the capacity to review all the ambers, but we do a 10% dip sample of the ambers, and I share that analysis back with the health boards. I think you're quite right to draw out amber, because in my sharing, I'm certainly aware of some incidents where those amber requests have been made. They have not been have been refused, and the patient has deteriorated, and some of those sadly have deteriorated to the most catastrophic of outcome. And so we know that there are those examples captured within the dip sample as well, which I do utilise the opportunity, of course, to bring to the attention of my colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. So going round, we've got hands up from Kerry, then I think over to Brendan. I think probably we'll go to the Martin. Are you waving him? Yes. Yes. Cross-eyed. So let's start with Kerry, and then we come to Brendan, and to Martin, and then across to Rachel. So Kerry, to you.
Thank you, Chair. I think this is a really important report for us as board, and I certainly welcome it continuing on our agenda. It's already been said by Bethan, it's still a staggering amount of harm that we're experiencing because of problems in the system, even catastrophic. Bethan's asked my question about Amber 1, but I did have two further questions. My first is around, are those 32 actions still the right 32 actions? So I think it's a very comprehensive set of priorities for us, and I feel quite assured by it. But it was just a question around when exec and other teams are looking at this report, do we have that lens? Is there anything else that we need to think about in this context? And then my second question was around the 6 Welsh Government goals. Are there any opportunities or any progress that you can update us on that is relevant, to these priorities? So I note the slow progress on SDEX, but is there anything else that you can share with us?
Yeah, so if I take the first one, then I'll ask Rachel to comment on 6 goals, as you now sit on the programme board for that. So on the first one, Kerry, the numbers escape me, but in the mix of the 32 actions. There are some newer actions which we've added since its original creation. So a good example is the red logic. So that's a new action which we developed a couple of months ago. So we're constantly kind of looking at this and saying, well, what else is there we can bring forward and do to be more efficient with the resource we've got, or create alternatives, in terms of how we manage the resource, to offset those losses that we're seeing in those emergency department handover delays. So there are new actions which have gone onto the action plan since its creation, and we're constantly looking at other things we can bring forward. And then Rachel might want to just talk about 6 goals briefly.
Yeah, and that was actually kind of what I was had my hand up for anyway.
Okay.
So that's a good question, Kerry. So I was just going to mention, it's not in the report, that I am now a member of the overarching 6 Goals Programme Board. And interestingly, I'm the only provider there, so the health boards aren't represented, but they have allowed us to be represented. So I think we kind of got away with quite a good one there. And the first meeting that I went to, which was a couple of weeks ago, was in fact an opportunity for each of the health boards to present the work that they were doing on the whole of the 6 Goals Programme. And they had 20 minutes, so they presented for 10 minutes and then had questions, asked of them. So it wasn't a hugely deep dive kind of exercise. But there is, there was a lot of work going on. You could see a lot of schemes, being described. The sense from Welsh Government, I think, and I won't kind of name them, but there was a confidence in a couple of the health boards and the work that they were describing and the impact that was having. Less of a confidence, perhaps, in some of the other some of the other health boards. But all of them have got real, large programs of work. They've all got dedicated leads. They all got a triumvirate that was funded by Welsh Government of a clinician and a finance person and an ops lead. So I've got all of the presentations. I've been on leave since, and I'm going to kind of go through them and share them with colleagues here, just for us to have a bit of a better sense of all of the work that they're doing and where perhaps we can lean in a bit more to some of that work. So it's a mixed bag, I think, Kerry, I'd say, is the answer to that.
Okay, Kerry?
Yes, thank you. I guess the only other thing I would say, Chair, is, of course, with the financial settlements and challenges, then I hope that it won't impact too much on the areas that are going to be positive for us. But hopefully we can receive more of an update at the next meeting.
Indeed, thanks, Kerry. Brendan, and I think Paul, you had your hand up, didn't you? Yes, so Brendan, then Paul, then across the mic.
Thanks, Chair. And I'm aware that you've already made the statement that we cannot allow any complacency to creep in here. So just to add some data to support that, the AACE figures were released yesterday, looking at the potential harm that comes as a result of delays over 1 hour, which of course is based on the national audit. So in June, even though the figures, and these are English figures, even though the figures have improved, an estimated 20,000 patients could have suffered harm, of which up to 10% could have been serious. Now that's based on 1 hour delays, and unfortunately the reality is that the hospitals in England are performing better than the majority in Wales based on that. So the figures that we see coming through, I suspect, are only, well, I wouldn't say tip of the iceberg, but there's certainly more that could be unearthed if everybody reported every potential delay. So absolutely no room for complacency. We know that patients are still coming to harm. I also met with GPC Wales a couple of weeks ago with some colleagues, and talking to some of the doctors there who tend to have their finger on the pulse, as it were, in these situations. There wasn't a huge amount of confidence that what we are seeing is anything other than seasonal variation, as opposed to structural and resource changes that are going to result in a sustained improvement over the winter.
Thanks, Ben. I think it's important to underline that if that is the case, then we're actually not seeing a genuine improvement, just seeing that seasonal benefit, which we would expect to see because of the weather. Paul.
Yeah, I was going to pick up the seasonal benefit and also the issue around the same day emergency care. It just seems that I'm not sure where it's available, what our referral rates are into it, but it's extremely low, isn't it? What they're taking. So, and that seems an area where we could really concentrate on, and it relieves our staff to put the patient in the right place. And it just seems incredible. The other thing that I find amazing is that there's no provider apart from us on the program board. So
I'll resist the temptation to comment on Welsh Government's programme board, but on the SDEX, I mean, Andy or Rachel might want to comment, but yeah, there is a nationally agreed referral protocol for our people, both from the road and also from CSD, from the Clinical Support Desk. We've modelled or assessed that about 4% of our volume, about 4% could go in, and it's 0.15. Yeah, I mean, it's tiny. It's tiny. We've raised this consistently with government through our integrated quality performance and delivery meetings. We've raised it at ESC. We've raised it where we've had exec-to-exec discussions with individual health boards, and peer groups continue to raise it too, to promote the opportunity which exists for us to help health boards improve emergency department handover and therefore overall flow by enabling direct referral to SDEC and other pathways where they're appropriate for us to do so.
And is that because SDECs are not available or not resourced?
No, I mean, I don't know. I mean, they are available in all health boards now. They also take referrals from direct from ED. So some of them say that the resources are insufficient to deal with referrals coming from every angle. Some of them, I think, are used in the end to bed people overnight, so that when we get there in the morning and start referring, that the beds are so I think some of them are not open as many hours as they might have wanted. So it's quite there's a range of issues, but we have agreed through those IQPD meetings with Welsh Government that we will submit to them, which we've started doing, the data on the referrals for each of them from us, or that accepted referrals rather. And that will be part of the kind of suite of dashboards that they use in looking at the performance of the SDEX. Because initially it was simply looking at numbers through, which looks quite good because they're coming through a different route, through the ED route or through other routes. So we are chipping, as Jason says, we're trying in every way we can to influence and to shine a light on that one.
Now, I'm just a bit conscious of time, so I think we've got Martin wanted to come
I will
in.
be brief, Chairman.
Okay, so Martin next, and then we'll final word with the hands up from Hannah on the screen. But Martin.
I think some of my points have already been made, particularly by Brendan, and I think the issue is that what we're seeing, the improvements we're seeing are more about demand and seasonal changes than they are about any actions that are being taken, and that I also I'm really concerned. You've heard me say this before, that we don't have enough clinical leadership in the. If there's going to be change, it's not going to be managers and politicians sitting around tables talking about this or throwing more money at it. It's going to be about clinicians making changes in their practices. And the only way that that's going to happen is if they sit around tables and talk about this as an issue. It's not going to happen, is it? I think you're sitting on a board. Yes, you might have a stronger say, but nothing's going to happen. And that's the cynicism I have about all this, that I can't see it. We've been talking about this for years. I can't see that anything has changed whatsoever, except the note that the people who are around the room talking about it. So I just really am very cynical about it. And I think once there's stress in the system, this is where we feel it. And it's not going to change.
Okay, thanks, Martin. And okay, and do you want to come in, Liam, before you go to Hannah? Or go on quickly.
I was going to say that there is a very senior clinical reference group that supports 6 Goals, and Andy is our representative on that. And actually, there are some of the good things that are coming out in the 6 Goals are the things that those clinicians are deleting.
I would agree. I'm going to interject an option to continue the conversation. but on the 24th of next month, we have a group of those clinical leaders from right across Wales coming to this very room to have one of those clinical conversations about changing things around. So very much take your point on that one, Martin, but things are moving in respect to that, and so I remain eternally optimistic at least.
Good. All right. Optimism on the left and pessimism. Do you want to come back on that one, Liam, and then we'll just finally get to
yeah, just a couple of comments we've heard, particularly in the context of seasonality, and I'm absolutely clear that the level of strategic service change that's needed is not leading necessarily to the level of impact that we are experiencing in terms of particularly on handover delays. But I would recognise that there is a level of attention from our executive colleagues across the health boards and a level of intervention from senior clinicians and managers of those health boards that is having an impact. So whether it's getting us to the place where all of the reduction is attributable to their input, ? But I would want to say out loud and acknowledge that there are executive colleagues, clinically, operationally, who are taking great strides to really understand what the system flow issues are within their hospital and to exercise their workforce to support us in being able to release our crews to respond to community incidents. And quantifying each measure, I don't know how much is seasonality, how much is leadership, but it is fair to say that there is a very high level of attention, and I think it's right that as a board we should acknowledge that there is that commitment coming across the health boards from our partners.
Thanks, Liam. I think that's very fair. So final comment then, I think, or question from Anna.
Thank you. Yes, a question on a slightly different element, which was the third action around the advanced paramedic practitioners. We can see in the update that they were expected to complete their training last month, 22 of them. So I wondered if Andy could confirm if 22 of them did complete their training and how they're being deployed and how we're planning to capture their impact to support future bids, because we see, of course, in the update here that we weren't successful in the bid that we were hoping for.
So in terms of the first two questions, yes and yes. So that's good news. In terms of the deployment, interestingly enough, we had one of those tests of change that we took place a couple of weeks ago, where we started to test out those deployment models, and that generated some really useful element in terms of how we might get more productivity from the APPs that we have. There's various different elements that we want to test in respect to that to get that the perfect way in which we can use these to best effect. So I think that's work in progress, Anna, and maybe offline I can probably bring you up to speed with a little bit more detail on that if you're interested. And in terms of capturing that data, I mean, we do capture it in a variety of different ways, some of which it kind of feeds through right the way through to us today. But what's been useful is with the work that James has been doing as well in terms of with the transformation stuff, we can start to see that chalk and cheese difference between the APPs and their effect, especially funnily enough around chest pain has probably been one of the big hitters. But those are the very conversations I want to get in on the 24th of August when we've got some key clinicians around the room as to what can we do about some of these patient categories.
Good, thanks, Anna.
Diolch, Andy. That's really great, and because obviously this is one of the things where we can really influence. So very positive to hear about that. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you, Hannah. Good. All right. Well, I suggest we move on if we may. We presumably will have this report again next time because we need to keep a very close eye on these very high risks and watch the seasonal changes as they come, because only that will be the evidence that Liam was talking about in terms of how much has been seasonal and how much has actually been system effect. Good. Do we have Erin on now, so we can go back to the item where we are going to be presented with the Trust annual report? We need to approve that. We need to approve the representation. This has been through the audit committee, I think. So do you want to
just very quickly, Chair, and then I'll hand over to Navin. So and yeah, thanks to Erin for being with us and joining from Audit Wales as well. Good to see you. as you say, Chair, there's a few slides which I know Navin's going to take board through. I think it is important that we try to distill down what is quite a lot of detail and in some cases a complex set of accounts to some headlines for the board to be able to approve. It's a similar set of slides that the audit committee received only 2 days ago. So we've recently had an audit committee deliberately timed in line with the audit of the accounts. So Navin will take us through in a little bit of detail, but not too much detail, I feel like, in terms of making sure that we discharge what we need to. But as I say, don't want to take up too much time, and also try to distill what is a very detailed annual report down to one slide, I think, in it as well, which is quite a challenge.
And also just recognising that this has been through.
And it has been through audit committee, and the slide will confirm it, but audit committee did recommend that the board approves today. But over to Navin.
Thank you, both. So just on to the next slide, if you could take us to Alex, thank you. So the context of the presentation is a general overview of the audit that's taken place for 22-23. Key points to note when reviewing the accounts, main headlines within the accounts, analysis on income and expenditure, balance sheet movements that we saw, audit Wells's opinion, which is obviously key to the whole process, annual report slide, which Trish will take us through it towards the end, and then I'll just outline the next steps that we have. Take us to the next one. So as a general overview, Audit Wells extended the certification deadlines for the, I think it's skipped across, has it? It's gone. You go to the next one. Let's skipped. Go back a few. Just, there should be a general overview point slide before that. That's the one. Thank you. Audit Wales extended the certification deadlines for 22-23 accounts for all NHS Wales bodies to the 31st of July 2023. Audit Wales are working to recover the audit certification deadlines for the following financial years as well. The draft accounts are submitted by WAST as per the deadlines and the revised timescales that we had for the financial year. All statutory financial duties were met by WAST. A detailed audit was undertaken by Audit Wales, and we achieved a retained surplus of £62,000 for the year. This was presented to Audit Committee, as we've just mentioned, on the 25th of July. An unqualified audit opinion was issued by Audit Wales, and accounts are due to be formally approved by the Trust Board today for onward submission to Welsh Government via AGW to meet the 31st of July deadline. Go to the next one. Great. So this is just a tabular form of our statutory duties and how we've met them. The first one obviously being to achieve break-even, which we delivered. The next one being capital expenditure limit, again, was fully achieved by the organisation. The EFL limit was suspended by the Welsh Government for 2022-23 based on value for money considerations, while the PSPP was fully met as well by the organisation. On the right-hand side, you've just got a very high-level overview of the financial statement, and as you'll see there, there's the bright red, which shows our retained surplus of £62,000. Next slide, please. Key points on the accounts: revenue, 2.4 million PIBs income, reflected as other income instead of Welsh Government income, was adjusted in the final accounts that are being submitted now. Employee costs, 6.3% pension support from Welsh Government, reflected the employer pension contribution in line with salaries and wages line in the note. The figures are 8.4 million and 7.8 million for the respective financial years. A key one next is the events after the reporting period. NHS Wales recovery payment was to be funded by Welsh Government is disclosed in this note. Though the amount of 4.2 million relates to the 22-23 financial year, the arrangement was not confirmed until after the year end had ended, and as such it was agreed by Welsh Government and Audit Wales that it would not impact on the 22-23 financial year statements other than by the means of this note, consistent with all of the other NHS Wales organisations across the country. Related party transactions, removal of transactions with the universities of the Welsh Government is not the parent body. So again, the main headline, 62k surplus achieved, effectively a break-even position, made up of 296 million worth of income and net expenditure of 296 million as well. All of the other points I've already mentioned on the previous slide. Just breaking down into the income, income from patient care activities at 283 million. 230 million of that came from our main EMS contract, which now includes ambulance care. Income from health boards of 17 million for 111 specialist contracts. Direct income from Welsh Government as well for 34 million, including 7 million for employers' pension contributions. Income from other trusts at 2 million led to a 21.6 million increase compared to the previous financial year. And on here, the main breakdown of the 21.6, 17.4 of it came from demand and capacity phase 2 funding at 5.6 million, demand and capacity phase 3 funding of 3 million, part-year funding, growth and inflation at 5.2 million, recurrent impact of the 21-22 pay award at 3.6 million. Ambulance care funding from NEPS via EASC was paid directly to us previously by health boards, hence there's an adjustment of 26 million upper one line and 24 down on the other. Other income increases of 2.5 million were received for exceptional cost pressures covering fuel, utilities, netted off by a reduction in COVID mobile testing unit. Other operating income for the year was 13 million, a total decrease in other operating income of 2.4 million, and the biggest driver on that being PIBS. Welsh Government ring-fenced funding around that. Investment and vehicle disposal income was received £720,000. Total increase leading to an increase in the previous financial year of 500k. Hence a total net increase in patient care activities, other operating income, as well as investment vehicle disposal income was 19.7 million for the year. Total net expenditure, 96.3 million for the year, was an increase of 19.9, as broken down into pay costs of 204 million, non-pay and other costs of 92 million. Main differences from the previous financial year being 14.6 million increase for frontline staff and total impact of final pay awards. Non-pay increase of 5.4 million, and this was driven by impairments and depreciation due to IFRS 16, quinquennial revaluations in accordance with DBR advice, and then MACA military support that was provided during the industrial actions, as well as increases in fuel and utilities for the year. On to the next one, thank you. Main balance sheet movements, tangible fixed assets started the year at 94 million. We had capital additions there of 25 million, index and revaluation at 3 million, depreciation impairments adjusting down for 23 million, leaving us a net book value as at the end of the 31st of March of 99 million. Debtors increased by 1.4 million, mainly due to the pay award that is pending from Welsh Government. Cash in bank was an increase of 500k. Borrowings increased by 10 million as a result again of IFRS 16. And then on to the next slide, the Audit Wales opinion. Audit Wales opinion provided by the audit of ISO 260 and a copy provided to the board. Details of the work undertaken, summaries of any of the adjustments made to the draft account and any recommendations for future years and any uncorrected mistakes, and crucially, the intended overall audit opinion on the account and financial statements. Obviously included within the packs are the draft letter of representation, and the key point being the audit opinion being that we have an unqualified set of accounts for this financial year, and they provide a true and fair view of the state of affairs of the Welsh Ambulance Trust and of the surplus that have been retained by the organisation. Annual report, I think we'll just hand over to you there, Trish.
Thank you. So the annual report comes in two parts really, but with financial statements added as the third part. So performance report sets out our performance for the year. There was no requirement again this year for a separate annual quality statement. So the quality elements are in the performance report, but there will be for next year under the new Act. And it's the more expanded performance report as it was pre-COVID. So both overview and analysis. Part 2 is the accountability report, so information about how we manage and control resources and risk and comply with our governance arrangements. And that includes the head of internal audit opinion that the board can take reasonable assurance on those arrangements. So the performance report, thanks to the performance team for pulling together what was a significant piece of work on that performance report, and the corporate governance team for the accountability report, steered by the Task and Finish group, which will have its last meeting next week, just to finalise the AGM arrangements. So these documents are large. It's 187 pages just for the annual report and an extra 100 odd for the financial statements. But as Colin said before, I think it's important to stress that the executive management team have seen this complete document twice. The audit committee has seen it The Remuneration Committee has also reviewed it, particularly around the remuneration tables, and Audit Wales and Welsh Government have reviewed it. They've sent some comments in which we've replied to and made the necessary adjustments. So although it's a very large document, it's certainly not the first pass through here. The accountability report includes a statement of directors on page 100, which I think is important for the board to bear in mind, because that's what will be signed after today, as well as a letter of representation in relation to the accounts. There is a translation, the Welsh language translation is in process. It will be ready by the AGM. We will be translating part 1 and part 2 and the introduction for the financial statements.
Okay, thank you very much, Trish. So shall we just hear from Chair of the Audit, who are going to formally recommend, I think, that we approve this, and also hear from Erin if there's any comments she wishes to make from Welsh Government's perspective. So, Martin, anything you want to
say?
I
mean, it's a good result for the trust. I mean, it's sometimes, you know, finance are one of those things, it doesn't get a lot of attention unless it's in trouble, you know. So thankfully it's not getting a lot of attention, and that's down to the stewardship of our finance department, and Navin's here and has done a lot of great work on this stuff, as is our finance director and team. I mean, the only thing that was noted in the meeting, and indeed in the finance meeting, was that we've met our financial target, but one of the issues underlying it is that we're using non-recurring means to do that. And it is an issue that was brought to the attention of the Finance Committee and will need to be addressed, because it's exactly the same in this year. We're still hoping to meet the financial targets, but there's an underlying, if you like, concern about the non-recurring nature of those savings. That aside, it was all very, very supportive.
Thank you, Martin. Erin, shall we go to you next and just see whether there's anything you wanted to add by way of comment from Welsh Government?
It would help if I had my headphones the right way around. Hello, everyone. Yeah, no, nothing additional from me, really. Navin's covered everything from our side. I just want to take up this opportunity to thank Navin, Chris, and the team for all the help, you know, in getting us over the line this year. It's been particularly probably tough this year. So yes, thank you for everything to get us here.
Thank you, Erin. Anything you wanted to add?
Well, only to say again, as thanks to the team for delivering the accounts as they have, and to, I guess, offer Colin, you know, I can take sufficient comfort to be able to sign the documents later based on the, you know, the information we've had today, that we've met our 3 statutory duties, and all the other data and information that Navin and the team have shared and prepared for us. So good stuff.
Good. Okay. Navin.
I just want to lay on record my thanks to the finance team, Trish's team, and a lot of other non-finance people as well were involved, because we don't do it on our own. We do it as part of the team. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you, Navin. Any questions, comments from anybody? I mean, I think, you know, my thanks also on behalf of the board. There are 2 parts to this. Obviously, it's the financial part, but it's also, the Trish was showing, it's actually the other document which accompanies it, which is a lengthy document, many hundreds of pages. A lot of work goes into putting that together, and it's been through, as we've heard, many eyes before it's got here to our final moment. So the final moment has arrived. Then, are we as a board prepared to accept the recommendation of the Audit Committee that we approve the annual report and the annual accounts?
Yes.
We are. Good. All right. And are we prepared as a board to allow Jason and I to sign the letter of representation?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good. All right. Thank you very much. And I suppose as a final point, I just say, you know, that's the year that's gone. We're in a different year now. So this time next year, Navin and Chris, we go again. Exactly. Yes, it never stops. Erin, thank you very much for attending. Good to see you again. And we'll let you get on to your day job.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.
Bye now. Bye. Okay, we've got one other item before we take a break, I think. So just going back to the agenda proper, and I think that's about risk. Is that not right? Okay, so is that over to you, Trish?
It is.
Yeah.
Chair.
Good. Okay.
So we have the risk register here, the corporate risk register in the back. There's 17 principal risks as set out in the annexures. All of the risks were reviewed in July except 100 and 283, and that's because of their score. They will be reviewed reviewed in August. You'll see that there's been an improvement on the BAF in as much as any updates are now in blue. So you see some movement, you see the different controls and actions there. The executive summary for the board, as we had agreed some meetings ago, draws out special attention for the 4 highest rated risks and where they've had particular discussion and scrutiny. So 223, 224, 160 and 201. And you'll see that there is a context box added in the BAF, particularly for those where a lot of the mitigations are outside of the control of the trust. I think we've talked about any movements in 223 and 224 in the paper that we had just before the annual report. There has been some review of that to see if we could change score both 223 and 224, but it was felt that it was too early and that there are still cases of patients deteriorating, as we've seen. Quest will have a look at that, as Bethan said, when it meets on the 10th. 160 and 201, which is the sickness and reputation risks, they stay at 20, but you'll see in the paper the rationale for them staying at 20, notwithstanding improvements in sickness absence in particular. But the People and Culture Committee looked at that in detail in May, as it always does. It will look at it again in more detail on the 17th of August when it meets. And if there's an opportunity to reduce that score, it will go through into the next meeting. But it was felt it was not appropriate to do it at this point. No new risks have been added to the risk register since the last meeting, but you'll see that there are some that are being worked up. But there has been some movement in risk scores as a result of the reviews since the last meeting. So we've got 2 that have increased in score. They're both related to likelihood. So they've gone from 12 to 16. The first is risk 424, which is the prioritization or availability of resources to deliver the INTP. And of course, that's related to our challenging financial climate. And it's also aligned to the financial risk, which is 139. The other one that increased is 163, which is trade union, maintaining strong and effective trade union relationships. And you'll see that there are a range of issues that require engagement and partnership working that the teams are working through now. But that's increased as well from 12 to 16. On the other end of the spectrum, there are 2 that are set for closure. So 557, which is the industrial action risk, and 245, which is capacity in the CCCs. They've both reached target score, so they will drop off the risk register. And for those other scores that have remained static, the report now provides more of a rationale as to why the score hasn't moved, or if it has moved, the reason for that. And I think that that's a good improvement because it gives you a bit of a richer picture. And lastly, you'll see the AAA from the Finance and Performance Committee goes into some detail on the risks that we talked about on the 17th of July. We spent quite a bit of time on those. And of course, Quest and People and Culture will do the same when they meet in the next couple of weeks.
Good, thanks, Trish. Good run through on those risks, changes, some ups, some downs, some cancelled. Any comments? We're asked to note them, which we obviously duly do. It's been well rehearsed through the committees, so I think we note. Oh, thank you. Sorry, Kerry.
Only a quick question, and it's quite specific. 424 on page 36. Really helpful actually to have the highlights here, Trish, so we can see what's been changed. My question is, where we've got the reporting on the savings, is that going to have a context of, if you look at 8 on assurances?
Sorry, Kerry, we can't hear you.
Yeah, Kerry, you're breaking up.
Oh, okay. Is that because I was turning my head away?
Yes, it was, I think. Yes.
Okay. Yes. I'll keep looking. So where it says on assurances, FSP reporting, I just wanted to check that that has the reporting in the context of the impact of the savings. So we touched on this a little bit at audit earlier in the week. So where we're not able to put resources out, that then the potential impact on that on patient harm. So I was just looking for some assurance here on the impact of those savings and where that's being captured.
Thanks, Joe. So who's going to take that?
I think I'll hand over to the risk owner if that's. Is it 424? Is it 424? Sorry, Kerry, I
Yeah,
didn't.
I wasn't sorry, Kerry. I wasn't quite sure which bit specifically
Okay.
you were. Which line? Where are you? You're on page 36.
I'm on page 36, risk
Yeah.
424. At the
Yeah.
bottom, it's got on, I don't want to turn my head, sorry, on controls, on line 8. And then to the right of that, it's got FSP program report. I can take it offline if it's easier.
So I think that's the financial sustainability highlight reports that are going into EMT, STB, and up to finance and performance.
So what was I'm sorry, Kerry, for not understanding the question. So those reports go in. What's the are you not assured about the level of the savings, or what is
no, what I'm asking about is the impact on those savings in relation to patients.
Okay, so we've got a £6 million savings programme agreed, some of which come through the FSP, some of it is through other directorate routes. We have started, I know you started, haven't you, the process of looking at quality impact assessment. So where we've got big schemes that are likely to have an impact on the quality of the service. So for example, we've been looking at overtime reductions. So we are looking at the impact in terms of patient care in those scenarios. Not on everything we do, probably, it's fair to say. It's all of some of the savings that we create are things that would be likely to have much less of an impact on patient care.
Yeah, and Kerry, I mean, it's many months ago. You might recall when we put the terms of reference together for the FSP and we took it through Finance and Performance Committee, we did reference that quality impact assessment would be part of the programme of any schemes that we're putting forward. So we do that assessment before we go ahead to try to deliver any other schemes or plan for them as well.
Okay, thank you, Navin. Thank you, Rachel. That's helpful.
So we may want to just add that, I suppose, in some way to describe that in this risk, so we can evidence that as well.
I think that's my point, really. It's the assurance on the controls. Probably could have articulated it better.
No, that's fine. I understand the point now.
Thank you very, very much, Kerry. Liam, did you want to just come in?
Just building on Rachel's comment. So we approved revisions to the quality impact assessment guidance at the last clinical quality governance group this week, or last week, sorry. So that has just been, the guidance has just been reissued. Important to note, we have a screening tool. This just gives some board members full sight. So there is a screening tool, which is actually quite a brief exercise. So when we want to make challenge ourselves in ensuring that the impact of what we're proposing is not significant, there is a tool that enables that then leads us into a full quality impact assessment as needed. Those QIAs are generally owned by the lead exec for the work that's taking place. They then are reported into CQGG, where they're reviewed by the full CQGG, which obviously is chaired jointly between Andy and I. So there is a full process that sits behind those QIs that is being rolled out across the organisation, very much in line with the duty of quality. And I think it is fair to say from the conversations that I'm having at a national level, I think we're in a very strong position in our process of rolling these out, and other organisations are taking some learning from the way in which we're adopting them.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other final points on the risk? We were asked to note those various changes to the risks, which we duly do. All right, so we've come to a break time, a 15-minute break. On the basis it's difficult to work anything other than whole 5-minute numbers. Why don't we just give ourselves an extra couple of minutes, as it's 11:23, and meet back here at 11:40. Okay. And Rachel, it's yours. So over to you.
Thank you. So just papers up. So I think this is a particular report that I don't need to say too much about. It went to Finance and Performance Committee, or summarise a slightly fuller version, and it's there for information. There's just one thing I'll just note you see there is that we still haven't had the IMTP for this year formally approved. We had understood that the letters had gone up to the minister, but nothing's come back out on that yet. Other than that, the report just sets out, I suppose, that the one risk that we know in Q1 is showing a red, which is related to Salus, and then some work that my team have been doing with others in terms of kind of just restructuring delivery mechanisms, and also kind of trying to refresh particularly some of our project kind of methodology and frameworks within the organisation to support. Other than that, nothing else particularly, I don't think.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Obviously, I wasn't here this time last year, but I assume this is sort of part of the course, really, that the plan gets approved many months after.
It was June last time, so it's a little bit later, I think. And as you might remember from the reports we had, what they tend to have is an approval, but you know, here's a few things that we pulled out that we want you to particularly concentrate on and get some further assurance on through the year, the accountability conditions. So we'd be assuming it'd be something similar this year.
Jason and I, we haven't had our objectives yet, have we? We haven't. So we made them up. Okay. Any comments? Any questions?
Came to F&P last Monday. I think page 4, if colleagues want to have a look at the enablers, page 4 is a really good synopsis of that.
Okay. All right. Well, I think in that case, that's a brief item. It's there for us to note, which we duly do. Thank you very much, Rachel. Let's move on to item 13, financial performance. Again, for assurance. Chris, do you want to lead off? I will
hand this one directly over to Navin, having been present throughout the month of June, which I wasn't.
Yes, that's fine, Chris. I'll take the report as having been read, also noting that we had a presentation given to Finance and Performance Committee last week. Overall highlights are that we have a month 3 financial position of a £33,000 overspend, so relatively break even. A forecast at this stage of the financial year is break even for the rest of the financial year, and a forecast to fully spend our capital budget by the end of the year. Assumptions on the revenue side of things, funding for the 6 million 100 WTE is assumed will be provided, and we've recently had the letter as well where negotiations are ongoing with commissioners. And as an organisation, we now have a fully identified 6 million savings plan with its risks to delivery, but we have a route to get to balance by the 31st of March, and that's it.
Good. Well, thank you, Navin. So it's early in the year, so we take comfort that we're kind of on track there or thereabouts. We recognise the risks. It's the next few months which are the most dangerous in terms of whether we meet balanced budget or not, isn't it? So
yeah, I think so. Just quickly, Chair, just to sort of note, to not for any detail today or discussion in this forum necessarily, but to obviously note, we're part of the system, so there's potentially system-wide NHS Wales impacts that we can't ignore within our own position as being part of that as well. So we need to be at the very least cognizant of that.
Indeed, the financial outlook is not particularly rosy. Okay, are there any questions or comments to the financial team from anybody? It is there for note, which we duly do, recognising the position as it is at the moment, month 3. Good. All right. Well, we're getting to these very quickly, so that's great. Thank you very much. Okay, on to item 14, the monthly integrated quality and performance report. Rachel, still back to you again, I think.
Yeah, it is. Thank you. So again, as normal, we'll take this as read, and I went to F&P, and I wasn't at that, but Hugh was there for me last week. I suppose just to pull out a couple of things from the SBAR covering, just because I think that it is really good news, and that's particularly around the 111 service. So obviously the report we looked at earlier covered quite a lot of the EMS risks and harms and performance, but this report pulls out some of the 111. And we had a 3.8% abandonment rate in June, and that is on target. That's one of the, we very rarely have been hitting that 5% target there. 59% of calls answered in 60 seconds. So that's still a way off where we would like to be, but it's significantly improved, and the clinical ring back times have remained good as well. And so I think that's a really positive sign. Now we do know obviously that the winter period has higher levels of demand, and there are risks as we move forward through the year, because the SALAS implementation has necessarily put on hold some of the recruitment and training work that we're able to do, both for call handlers and for clinicians. So there will be an attrition rate of call handlers and clinicians through the next few months, which will make the performance, doesn't stay at that good rate. But the team are doing lots of other work behind the scenes, particularly in terms of making sure that the resources are being used as efficiently and effectively as possible. So that's a really good positive. And the other one, of course, which is a really positive note, is the sickness absence figures, which is now below 8%, and we know the target is to get to 6% by the end of the year, which that's definitely still not without risk. But I think a lot of good work going on both in ops and with workforce colleagues to support people to back into work and to stay in work. So other than that, I don't think, so we spent quite a lot of time on the EMS performance indicators, but obviously happy to take any questions, any detail. Oh, sorry, I forgot, because there's two aspects to this report. Sorry. The second aspect, which we discussed at our board development session, was the revision of the metrics that we use at this level. For this year, we do that annual review every year. Again, we discussed it at board development. It went to Finance and Performance Committee, and Finance and Performance Committee, as I understand, were happy to approve that amended set of metrics. So it's a slightly increased set of metrics, and does include some, as we noted in the action plan, around staff wellbeing and culture. So we've got some further, probably not perfect yet, but some kind of indication of how we're moving in terms of the culture of the organisation. So again, hopefully we don't need to discuss those in a huge amount of detail, but they're there also for approval today from board.
Okay, shall we hear? You chaired the F&P, didn't you? So it was just speaking to you.
A more meaningful sort of set of metrics. We were quite happy with the direction of travel, as Rachel says. There may be some adjustments going forward, but otherwise, I think we were quite happy with Hugh's presentation. He did a really good job on both aspects, actually. So, and in fact, Rachel just reminded me that there were Judith Bryce and Jason Fennard and Hugh Bennett all presented at F&P last week. And I don't know where in the minutes, but I'd like to thank them for what they did. It was really good.
I'm very appreciative of I know you thank them.
Yeah, it's just
very nice.
Well, it just shows we've got depth as an organisation, which shows that the things we talked about a couple of years ago about growing people are coming to fruition now with confidence. So I think that's important. But Chair, very comfortable with the direction of travel.
Okay. Oh yes. Okay. I think Andy had been up first. So go to Andy and then to Paul.
Yeah, it's just item 15 on the SBAR, if I could please, Chair. And I think it's worthy of note, whilst acknowledging we've still some way to go in terms of some of the stroke and the other clinical indicator bundles in terms of driving that performance. June saw is the highest ROS rate we've ever had in Wales. And when you look at the uptick in terms of when that performance has started to improve, it directly aligns with the push and rollout of CHARI. So, from me, it's a big thank you in terms of the teams that have been involved in CHARI, both in terms of rolling out to you colleagues in terms of supporting us with their working group. But you can see there's clearly a direct benefit from the time as which we're rolling out CHARI. And it's starting to pay the dividends and do the very thing that we anticipated it would do, with a 22%, which we've never even been close to previously. Our starting point was less than 10.
Yeah, it's remarkable. Okay. Well, I don't know if that's in your key.
Only to say we drew specific attention to that in F&P, Andy, around the ROS rates. hitting a rate we've never achieved before. So we were equally as pleased as you were. So well done to everyone.
Good.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, I just want to ask a question, Rachel, on paragraph 8, the 198 call handlers. I know you've been in negotiation with commissioners. Is that what we required, or is that what we ended up with?
It possibly is slightly more than we were thinking we needed, actually.
Oh, well, that's good.
So it's a figure that came from the commissioners. I think it's based on, you know, we think we need another 10. Oh, I think we need another 10. I'm not sure there was this is not a huge level of science, but it was at the time about we're still not hitting the call answering times. Therefore, we think we need some more capacity. So in that sense, it's you know, it's good.
So
we're not at that. We are, but we're not at that level at the moment. We're more at like the 170. We're quite a bit off that. But yeah, so the good thing is that we do now have from the commissioners a sense of, you know, 198 call handlers, 100 clinicians, and that is good that we've got a baseline.
That's
now,
really good, isn't it? Because we
were keen to do that. We're pleased that we've got that agreement with them and we can work towards it then.
That's great.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I'm glad we've called out 111 because it's been good to see that continuing into this month as well. And so it's the combination of an effort on behalf of a lot of teams, I think. So really good to see. I just wanted to talk a little bit about perhaps how things are playing out for us currently and what for us to look out for in the coming months. Obviously, the report does some month-on-month comparison, so just the obvious word of caution comparing June to May. There's a day less in June, so if you tighten up numbers, that will play a part. But we just need to apply some caution to UHP percentage reporting between emergency ambulances and CHARUs for a little while. We have, you know, Andy has already mentioned the growth of CHARU. And so what we are going through now is a period of transition. So that is going to mean some less EA production, increasing CHARU production. So without a change to the denominators in the hours, the percentages are going to shift around. So we may appear over-resourced on CHARU, under-resourced on emergency ambulances. So that's why it's really good to look at the numbers, I would suggest, for a little while as we transition our way through that. Of course, what we're seeing now in July, we've started to have a look at some comparisons, and as that transition's occurring, July's panning out reasonably okay for us because our abstractions are continuing to improve in July compared to June. But of course, that's up to a point in time. We have just hit school holiday, and of course the whole health service will now experience exactly the same thing, which will be an increase in annual leave, access to annual leave, which will increase abstractions, which for us, dovetailing back to the financial position and the financial report, is requiring some controls on our overtime spending, and so that is likely to have some target and some constraints for us as we move through August, particularly, I would suggest, when annual leave is maximised and we are having to financially control our spending. There. So we need to make some good correlations between produced hours, abstraction hours, and overtime hours, recognising the performance, the patient outcome and safety, workforce experience and financial positions. There's a lot at play as we're just transitioning now, or as we're moving through certainly the next 6 weeks, that will present some challenges for us. I'm optimistic moving into September then, because we do have a planned group of NGPs expected to start with us. So potential for some challenge over the next 6 weeks.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? So on 16, where we say UHP was 92%, failing to achieve the target. Yeah. That was purposeful, though, is it?
So that is so, and part of the explanation to that will be that there hasn't been a shift in the denominator as we've grown CHARU and EA is reducing. We've got to work through a process of how to achieve that with our trade union partners, consequence on rosters, patterns, etc.
So we knew that would happen.
So
because of what we were doing.
absolutely. And that outcome has also been notified to our commissioner as well in terms of the financial controls we're having to deploy.
Thank you. Thanks, Lee.
Sorry if I may, Chair. One of the what we haven't quite achieved yet, and we're going in the new set of metrics we're going to try and move to, is the sense of a totality of the hours produced against what we're commissioned to do, and that takes account of that resource mix. And so we do need to get a bit smarter, I think, and quicker at where we shift resources from one type to another, and agree that with the commissioners. We need to reflect it quite quickly in the way that we do that in the performance report. But it isn't simple, but we are going to try and get a bit slicker about it.
Okay, any other comments on the data? We're asked to note that and to satisfy ourselves that it's providing us with the appropriate level of scrutiny. Yes, we're happy with that. And then we're also asked to approve the new metrics, which are being recommended by the F&P committee. So we as a board are no doubt happy to accept that recommendation. Okay, good. Thank you very much. That was grand. Right, let's move on then. So item number 15, Trish, over to you. Standards of business conduct quality.
Thank you, Chair. This is here for approval following the endorsement of the Audit Committee 2 days ago on this. So we had a limited assurance internal audit at the end of last year on standards of business conduct. We gave an update to Audit Committee, so all actions are either closed or in train or not yet due. So the policy really is the main driver for change and addresses the majority of the issues in the audit. Wholesale changes are set out in the policy. It is a different policy to the policy we've got now, although hasn't changed. The principles around gifts and hospitalities and declarations, but it's given it a bit more depth and breadth. We do now have a register of interest, which is available on the website, and it's linked to all our agenda as well. So that was one of the recommendations. So once this is approved, we'll have a comms plan to get the policy out, but also particularly bespoke comms and infographics around gifts and around hospitality, and particularly pushing that out at festive times of the year where gifts are more prevalent as well. So we've got that in train also. And we're looking for an electronic solution. ESR is a solution, but some of the reporting is not quite there just yet, but we're looking at that to mature into it. But at the moment, I think with this policy, we're covered off all of the limited assurance issues in the internal audit report.
Good. Okay, Martin, whether you wanted to add anything, you're recommending it from the committee.
As Trish mentioned, it went to audit committee and was approved without much discussion, really, which suggests people were happy rather than hadn't read it, I guess.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it's good. It's a good bit of work, and it covers every possible eventuality, I think.
Good.
Can I just add, Chair, that before it gets to audit committee, of course, it goes through the policy group, and we work in partnership with our trade unions on that. And Damon was my partner on this policy as well. So thanks to Damon for supporting that through, and also, of course, went to the executive management team on route as well.
As always, many days before it gets here. So recommendation then to approve that as a new policy documentation. Are we all content to approve that? I guess we are. Good. All right, that's fine. Motoring on very swiftly. So item number 16, still with you, Trish, a governance report.
Thank you. This is just for the board to approve the affixing of the seal to a license for alterations for Unit 3, Phoenix Park, Telford Street, Newport. It's not for the actual licenses, but for the affixing of the seal as per our standing orders. Chris and I will sign that after the meeting and have the seal affixed in front of the chair and the chief executive. And also in paragraph 4, just notes that we did approve, board did approve the trust seal back in January for a fence installation here at the Cardiff MRD. There has been some amendments to that, so there's a new agreement which we will seal today as well. So we don't need the approval for affixing that, but it already happened, but just for noting.
Fine, thanks so much. Any comments on any of that? If anybody watching thinking that affixing the seal is some grand event that will fall, it's actually it's the peeling of a pre-prepared sticker onto a piece of paper. It's nothing quite as grand as we might have done now. Okay, so that's done. So we approved that. Thank you very much. Okay, we come now to item 17 then. So that's board committee reports. We've got a finance and performance committee and got a highlight report. I don't know again whether you want to say anything more, Kevin, on that.
I mean, we talked in detail around the policies and the review date, and on the face of it, 14% of policies currently within a review date might not look good, but most of them are extant with minor changes anyway. And the major review that Trish is going to look at is around what constitutes a policy, a standard operating procedure, etc. So a lot of these are perhaps not truly policies by definition. The only other thing I'd like to just say here is we looked at, we took the EPRR report and the Welsh Government Annual Emergency Planning Report. There's a lot of discussion around that. It brought a lot of interest, and it gave us, as a committee, perhaps a deeper understanding of wider work within the organisation. Lee came in, but presented mainly by Judith, with Jason Fennard in support. Otherwise, it was pretty straightforward.
Good. Okay. This is for noting, AAA report, Trish.
Just a note on the policies, if I may, I think that as we've noted in the AAA, policies don't expire. So although that percentage is quite jarring, there are a number of assurances outside of that around our Audit Wales review and structured assessment and internal audit opinion. So we will be addressing those fairly good, and we're seeing already a momentum of policies coming through now. So just to give assurance of that, and the committees will also, upcoming committees will look at these in more detail for their committees, and the audit committee is going to have a report on this on a regular basis for the remedial actions.
Okay. Any other comments on that item? Doesn't look like it. So moving on to the next one on the same bundle of list, as it were, is an audit report. I believe, Martin, are we receiving a verbal report from you on your
Yeah, I mean,
meeting?
I will be brief because two of the main items that were discussed at the meeting have already been considered by today's meeting. So the meeting was actually held 2 days ago, and it was mainly to go through the accounts and get those ready for submission to today's meeting. So I think everything else that I can recall can wait until the next meeting when the minutes are available.
All right, thanks, Martin. Unless anybody's got any questions they want to put to Martin. No, okay. I've got a list. I don't know, Trish, what did you write about internal audit? Report?
Just to put the head of internal audit opinion into the record for today, just to note that.
Okay. Do you want to talk to it, or are you just content to leave that as a?
Well, the head of internal audit opinion was summarised in the annual report and the accountability report, but because the meetings were so close together, we missed it in that substantive item, so it's in with the AAA. So just for noting.
All right, good. Thank you very much. And the final.
Sorry, there was one more comment. I should have made it earlier. When we did the annual accounts, we also did the annual report. And that was a voluminous report, and I did make the comment in the audit committee that I'd like to repeat today. It was an excellent report. It's like 168 pages. It's a voluminous report. I'm sure it gets read by somebody down at the assembly because it covers off every single base you can think of. But a lot of work, effort went into that report. So a big thank you to those that put that together. I should have mentioned that earlier. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Martin, and we echo that. Okay, we then have the Remuneration Committee highlight report. I'm going to ask Tracy, I don't know whether you want to mention, because it essentially, as far as I'm aware, centred around medical director issues, whether you want to just raise that now or talk about it later.
Well,
another date.
So we've got the Remuneration Committee report here from the 5th of June, thank you, in the papers. And then, as you allude to, Chairman, we had another RemCom yesterday, and that AAA hasn't worked its way through yet. What we considered as a committee yesterday were changes to the senior leadership in the Clinical Services Directorate. This essentially arises as a result of Brendan retiring at the end of this calendar year. We'll offer thanks and presents and all that kind of stuff and embarrass you more and more as we get closer to the time, Brendan. But in preparation for that, Remuneration Committee yesterday agreed to the movement of the executive portfolio, a voting portfolio that Brendan holds, to Andy in his role as Director of Paramedicine. He'll become Executive Director of Paramedicine from the 1st of January 2024, and also to support some adjustments to the substructure in that directorate, which would see 2 fractional appointment medical doctors, one focused on acute care, one focused on primary or non-acute care. That person is to be recruited in the coming months, which would mean essentially that from January 2024, whilst we'll have access to medical doctors in board and in the executive team, we won't have a medical director as part of the trust board or a sitting member of the executive team. So the senior clinical leadership will be provided by Liam and Andy. Better reflecting the bulk of our workforce, in growing numbers of nurses in the organisation, and obviously paramedics and other allied professionals in operations. And as you said, that's been a strategy. It's been underdeveloped for some time. It's been discussed and considered in various places. So good update. Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that's it for the committee report section. So we're on to the closing items, the consent items. We have the minutes, F&P minutes to noting. Yes, there's no comments on those. We have some other committee papers, joint committee update reports, ESC summary, insurance reports from the SSPC. Everybody content with those? So I think that brings us to the end of the meeting. Got any other business, just in case there is anything wishes to raise? Doesn't look like there is. We have a date and time for the next meeting, which is the 28th of September, which I assume will be here. Again, excellent. So in that case, it just leaves me to thank you all for your attendance to this first part of today's work, the open board. We need to resolve for the exclusion of the press and members of the public. So we invite press and members of the public to leave, because the next section will be the confidential items to be transacted in the closed board section. But we'll have lunch first. Looking at the clock, just gone 12. So I wonder whether we could actually arrange to get back here for 1 o'clock, in which case we're well ahead. That suits everybody, or maybe even 1:45. What do you think, Trish? Do you think we can make it in 45 minutes? I think we probably can, don't you? Yeah. So why don't we say 45-minute lunch, just to be less actually, but let's try and get back here at 1:45, and then we'll press on with the closed session. Good. Okay. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.